Christian paid a clinic to silence the grief after his brother died. 8 months later, his wife stood in front of him crying, and he felt nothing. The treatment had worked exactly as promised. It had simply muted everything he still had to live for. His younger brother Baldur died in a climbing accident 8 months ago, and Christian stopped functioning almost entirely afterward. Couldn't work, could barely speak to his wife, Ellen, without breaking down mid-sentence. A colleague mentions a clinic downtown, Calmline, that offers targeted emotional adjustment, not erasing memories, they're careful to say, just dulling the intensity of a specific emotional response.
Think of it like turning down one channel on a mixing board.
The technician tells him at the first session.
The memory stays. The volume on the pain comes down.
It works, at first, better than Christian expected. He goes back to work. He sleeps through the night. He can say his brother's name out loud without his voice cracking. He goes to Baldur's favorite fishing spot for the first time since the funeral and stands there for a full hour, waiting for the wave of grief he'd been dreading, and it just doesn't come the way it used to. He tells himself that's a good thing, repeatedly, like a fact he's still convincing himself of.
You seem more like yourself,
Elin tells him, a few weeks in, relieved. But a few months later, she starts saying something different.
You laughed at Sigga's joke last night,
she says.
I mean, you made the sound. Your face didn't really do anything.
I heard the joke. I know it was funny.
That's not the same as actually finding it funny, Christian.
He brushes it off, the way he's brushed off most things since starting treatment, because functioning again feels like such a relief that he doesn't want to look too closely at what it might be costing him.
You used to cry at the dumbest commercials.
Elin says another night, watching him watch television with the same flat attention he gives everything now.
You haven't cried at anything since the 3rd session.
Isn't that the treatment working?
I don't actually know anymore what we're calling working.
He doesn't have an answer for her that night either. It's during a routine follow-up that the technician finally explains what's actually happening.
Grief isn't stored in isolation,
she says.
It shares neural pathways with a lot of your other significant emotional responses: joy, love, attachment. We can't turn down grief specifically without some bleed into everything wired next to it. Most patients notice a general flattening. It usually stabilizes.
It hasn't stabilized. My wife says I don't really feel things around her anymore.
That's worth taking seriously,
the technician says.
Some patients choose to stop treatment and let the grief return in full, specifically because the alternative costs them too much elsewhere. It's not a decision I can make for you. I can only tell you what the data shows.
Christian doesn't want that. Sitting with the full weight of Baldur's death undulled feels like something he genuinely isn't sure he can survive, and functioning but flat feels, most days, like the better trade. Ellen doesn't agree.
I'd rather have you sad and present,
she tells him,
than calm and gone.
You don't know what it's actually like in there.
No,
she says.
But I know what it's like out here, watching you not really be anywhere.
He finally asks the technician, during his next session, what exactly is underneath the grief she's been turning down for him. Because some instinct tells him it isn't simple sadness. It's something with weight and shape he's been actively avoiding. She pulls up his intake pattern from the very first appointment.
There's a guilt marker tied directly to the grief,
she says.
Consistently, every session. It's not just loss. There's something else layered under it.
Christian goes quiet because he already knows, somewhere he hasn't let himself look directly at in 8 months, what that is. Baldur had said things in the weeks before the accident, small things, about not seeing the point of much anymore, about the mountain being the only place that ever felt quiet. Christian had heard it. He'd told himself his brother was just tired.
He called me the week before,
Christian says slowly, the memory surfacing whole like it had been waiting for permission.
Said he wanted to go up alone that weekend. I told him that was a bad idea, Solo, that time of year. He said it was the only place he still felt like himself. I let it go. I had work. I told myself I'd bring it up again after.
You didn't know what that meant necessarily.
I think some part of me did. I just didn't want it to be true, so I filed it under tired, and tired felt like something I didn't have to act on.
The accident wasn't entirely an accident.
He says out loud for the first time.
I can't tell you that.
The technician says gently.
I can tell you the emotional signature underneath your grief has never matched simple bereavement. It's carried guilt from the very first session.
Christian stops treatment 2 weeks later. Not because the technician tells him to, but because he finally understands that dulling the grief was also dulling the one thing forcing him to actually sit with what he'd missed, what he might have done differently. The specific, unbearable shape of it, not just generic sadness. Aylin doesn't get the version of him back that existed before Balder died. Nobody does, not really. But she gets one who cries at the right moments again, who laughs and actually means it, who sits with her some nights and finally talks about his brother instead of around him.
I keep thinking about what I could have said to him.
Christian tells her one of those nights.
Some version where I actually asked him directly, instead of just hoping he was fine because it was easier for me.
You can't fix that now.
I know. I just didn't want to keep hiding from the fact that I know it.
He goes back to the fishing spot one more time, months after stopping treatment. And this time, the grief actually arrives. Full volume, exactly as unbearable as he'd been avoiding for 8 months. He lets it happen anyway, standing there for a long time because he's finally understood that avoiding it was never really about the grief at all. Here's what stays with me about this one. Calm Line promised Christian relief from pain. What it actually offered him, without meaning to, was a way to avoid a guilt he wasn't ready to face, wrapped inside a treatment that quietly cost him everything else he still had left to feel. So here's the question. If you could turn down the volume on your worst pain, even knowing it might mute everything good sitting right next to it, would you take the trade? Genuinely, what would you do?